in a quaint, somewhat forgotten corner of the world, nestled within the embrace of ancient, whispering forests and the rolling mists that descended each morning like a silent prayer, lay a small town. It was in this town, a place where stories seemed to seep through the cobblestone streets and linger in the air like the fragrance of old tales, that Ernest, a young writer with dreams that stretched far beyond the horizons, lived. Despite the fire of passion that burned within his heart, Ernest found himself ensnared in the silent, suffocating grip of writer's block. The blank pages before him stood as stark reminders of his silent struggle, each unmarked sheet a canvas awaiting the touch of his pen. Fate, it seemed, had its own narrative in mind when it steered Ernest towards an estate sale sprawling across the lawn of an old manor at the town's edge. This manor, cloaked in ivy and secrets, had once been the sanctuary of a reclusive author, a figure enshrouded in local lore as someone who had vanished into the ether as mysteriously as the phantoms that graced his tales. It was amidst the relics of a life lived in solitude and stories that Ernest's gaze fell upon a desk. This was no mere piece of furniture, but an artifact carved from dark wood that seemed to drink in the light, adorned with the marks of time and tales untold. A hidden mechanism, a secret known only to the desk and now to Ernest, revealed itself to his inquisitive touch, a compartment concealed within its bowels. Within this hidden chamber lay a manuscript, its leather binding the color of a moonless midnight, pages yellowed with the passage of time yet untouched by the decay that claimed lesser works. As Ernest lifted the manuscript from its resting place, a sense of destiny enveloped him, a feeling as if the very threads of his fate had become entwined with the ancient pages cradled in his hands. Back within the sanctuary of his modest home, where the world outside faded to a mere whisper against the windows, Ernest delved into the manuscript with a fervor that bordered on obsession. The tome was a marvel, an enigma that wove tales of disappearance and loss with an intricacy that left Ernest breathless. These were stories of individuals who had vanished without a trace, each narrative woven with a realism that transformed the pages from mere parchment to windows gazing upon truths untold. The tales bore the weight of reality, hinting at lives intertwined with the very fabric of the town Ernest called home. The manuscript had become Ernest's world, its ancient pages a labyrinth from which he could not, would not escape. The tales it told, of lives erased from the fabric of existence, resonated with a truth that was as undeniable as it was horrifying. The deeper Ernest delved into its narratives, the more the line between reality and the ethereal tales within the manuscript blurred, until he could scarcely tell where one ended and the other began. Ernest's life outside the manuscript began to unravel as his obsession grew. His once bustling social life dwindled to nothingness, the calls of concerned friends left unanswered, their voices fading echoes in the recesses of his mind. His family, too, noticed the change. The vibrant, passionate Ernest they knew retreated further into the shadows, his presence in the house like a ghost, there but not quite. Conversations at the dinner table grew strained, his parents and siblings casting wary glances his way. The manuscript always by his side, its leather cover worn from constant handling. As autumn gave way to the cold embrace of winter, the town itself seemed to reflect Ernest's isolation. The trees, once a riot of color, now stood bare, their branches like skeletal hands reaching for an indifferent sky. The people of the town, who had always greeted Ernest with warmth, now looked upon him with a mixture of pity and unease, whispers following him as he passed. It was during these long, cold months that the manuscript began to reveal its darker nature. The stories, once content to narrate the fates of those long forgotten, started to insinuate themselves into the present. Names and places Ernest knew, faces he recognized, began to populate the pages. A chill settled over him as he read a tale mirroring the disappearance of a local, someone who had vanished without a trace only weeks before. The manuscript offered no explanation, no reason, only the stark, unyielding narrative of loss. Standing at the precipice of a mystery that called to him with the allure of the unknown, Ernest delved deeper into the manuscript's depths. With each story, with each life unraveled within its pages, he began to wonder if his own tale would find its way into the manuscript, if his existence would become but a whisper in the wind, another name etched into the annals of the lost. Ernest's fear grew, a creeping, insidious thing that whispered of ancient curses and the price of knowledge sought but never meant to be found. The manuscript, he realized, was not merely a collection of stories, but a sentient entity, its appetite for the lost and the forgotten insatiable. It was a hunter, and he, its unwitting prey, drawn into its web by curiosity and the lure of the unknown. In his desperation, Ernest sought out the history of the manuscript, poring over old records and tales whispered in hushed tones. It was then he learned of the manuscript's previous owner, the reclusive author who had vanished much like the characters within its pages. His search led him to a figure shrouded in mystery, a survivor of the manuscript's curse, who lived on the outskirts of town, a recluse feared and revered in equal measure. The meeting was one Ernest would never forget. The survivor, an elderly man with eyes that had seen too much, spoke of the manuscript with a mix of reverence and terror. He told Ernest of its true nature, a collector of souls, its stories, a tapestry woven from the lives it had claimed. The author, he revealed, had been its last victim, drawn into the manuscript's narrative until he was nothing but a memory, his existence erased from the world. Ernest listened, a sense of dread settling over him like a shroud. The manuscript's curse was clear. Those who sought to uncover its secrets, who allowed themselves to be ensnared by its tales, would find their stories written into its pages, their lives forfeited to its hunger. The only salvation, the survivor warned, was to sever the connection, to reject the manuscript before it claimed him as its next victim. Armed with this knowledge, Ernest stood at a crossroads. The manuscript had become a part of him, its stories intertwined with his very being. To turn away from it now would be to deny a part of himself. Yet to continue down this path was to embrace a fate more terrifying than death itself, to become a forgotten tale, whispered in the shadows, a warning to those who would follow in his footsteps. With the weight of the manuscript's curse bearing down upon him, Ernest found himself caught in a storm of despair and desperation. The realization that his own story was being inscribed into the manuscript, his fate sealed by the very tales he had become obsessed with, left him grappling with a fear profound and paralyzing. Ernest understood then that the manuscript did not merely predict his disappearance. It was actively scripting it, entwining his destiny with those who had vanished before him. Determined to confront the manuscript's malevolent influence head-on, Ernest resolved to take drastic action. He recalled the words of the reclusive survivor, the warnings that to continue reading was to invite oblivion. With this in mind, Ernest made a choice that felt like the severing of a part of his own soul. He would attempt to destroy the manuscript. Ernest's first attempts to rid himself of the manuscript were futile. Fire refused to touch it, water seemed to flow around it, and no matter how far he threw it from himself, he would always find it near him again, its presence an unyielding shadow that haunted his every step. The manuscript was unmarked, undamaged, and utterly indestructible by any means he could fathom. As the days passed, the isolation that had once been Ernest's shield now became his prison. His family's concern grew into a tangible thing, a constant pressure that he found himself pushing against even as he longed to embrace it. Friends no longer visited, their patience and understanding worn thin by his refusal to step away from the manuscript's grasp. In his darkest moment, a spark of defiance flared within Ernest. If he could not destroy the manuscript, perhaps he could still escape its curse. The manuscript wanted his story, his essence, to feed its endless hunger. But what if he could change the narrative? What if he could write an ending on his own terms? Ernest sat down to write. Not with the manuscript, but against it. He wrote of his struggle, his fears, and his determination to defy the fate the manuscript sought to impose upon him. He wrote of his love for his family, his hopes for the future, and his refusal to fade into the obscurity of the manuscript's pages. With each word, he felt as though he was reclaiming a piece of himself, stitching the frayed edges of his spirit back together. As Ernest filled the pages of his journal, a profound sense of catharsis enveloped him. The manuscript, which had once cast a long shadow over his existence, now lay inert, its once menacing aura diminished to a mere whisper of its former self. The act of writing his own narrative, of asserting his will over the manuscript's designs, seemed to have broken its hold over him. Yet, the true outcome of Ernest's defiance remained shrouded in ambiguity. In the days that followed, Ernest was not seen. His family, friends, and even casual acquaintances could only speculate about his whereabouts. The manuscript, too, was nowhere to be found, its final resting place as much a mystery as the fate of its last known keeper. The story of the young writer who dared to challenge the manuscript became a whispered legend in the town. Some said Ernest had triumphed, that he had freed himself from the manuscript's curse and started anew somewhere far from the shadows that had once bound him. Others speculated that the manuscript had claimed Ernest as its ultimate prize, his story ending not with freedom, but with his absorption into its collection of lost souls. The manuscript resurfaced in an old, dimly lit bookstore, nestled between volumes of forgotten lore and tales of the arcane. It caught the eye of an unsuspecting reader, drawn to its leather-bound mystery and the promise of untold stories within its pages.